Now we have the last presentation of this panel about subjective well-being and social programs by Mariano Rojas. I know he's one of the most known persons, but I'm going to talk about his resume. He's a professor of economics in Flaxo, Mexico, and also in the popular Autonomous University of Puebla. He's coordinator of the initiative Measuring Progress of Societies, a perspective from Mexico, which is sponsored by the Technological Forum, and he's responsible for the global program of the OECD. He's also VP of the International Society for Quality Life Studies, and his main area of research is about subjective well-being and its relationship with economic indicators. He has published more than 40 articles and books, and he has a PhD in economics from the Ohio State University and belongs to the National Researchers System. Thank you. We are always late. I thank INEGI for inviting me to this session. Maybe we'll begin with a very concrete illustration. Let's suppose someone comes and tells me, Mariano, take out those flowers. And if they tell me, Mariano, take out those flowers, the part of Mariano, I know it's myself, there's no doubt, but I would have to face three problems. First, the flowers. It's quite simple. Here we have the flowers. All of us agree those are the flowers. The second problem is, how do I take them out? There are very simple manners. I pick them up. The third problem, which I will refer to, is once you see me walking, I go out, I open the door. What do I do with the flowers? One thing is to take them out, and the other where I will put them. So I think that subjective well-being and my presentation, it's something similar. We are all used to listening to taking people out from poverty. It's heard and repeated all over and over again. We face the same three problems than with the flowers. The first one is, where are the poor people? What's that? And believe me, it's not that simple. I'm not going to talk about today who the poor people are. We are used to hearing that we have to identify the poor people. One phrase from a book from Matthias Sen, we need to identify the poor people. Sincerely, I don't think that we identify poor people. What we are doing is classify human beings as poor people. And when we say classify human beings as poor people, we have a series of biases. Who classifies them with which criteria, what discipline, what's the cultural bias of this expert, where was he educated? Being objective, the variable there, it doesn't solve the problem because there are several objective variables. The issue is which one of those variables, how we weigh them, and this is full of biases to the extent that what we've done is conventionalism. If you think that, and I also, we move forward, casually excluding those who are the beneficiaries, who should be present in this debate about which the flowers are or who the poor people are. I'm not going to talk about this. This is a very important topic, but I'm going to rescue this idea that we're classifying human beings as poor people. And we synthesize them in a phrase, they are the poor. We forget that they are human beings. I'm going to skip this quickly, but I think the main message is that subjective well-being helps us to be more efficient, to make the social programs more efficient. More efficient in their purpose. What's the purpose? It's to have an income higher than $2 in per capita income daily. what do we aspire to? How do we design these programs to have a higher impact? And then how do we assess them? Do we assess them in the dimension of income, or does subjective well-being contribute to see if these people are not poor anymore, but also do they have a satisfactory life, something they value as good? I think that subjective well-being helps us to reformulate the purpose, the objectives, but also there's another area quite interesting, already mentioned, it's the behavioral economics. It's very interesting to see that the human motivation, what human beings strive for is to be happy. I'm going to broaden this. What are we looking for? And in this regard, we have to incorporate in the social programs that we have at present motivation. What do people look for? Sometimes we think that everyone's looking for a higher income. Sometimes we think that what people want is to have a work to be paid for, and with that, buy what will give them happiness. And what is normal is that we find happiness in job and not with the income. So it's a topic related to efficiency to improve the impact of our social programs. And the efficiency is not only related to rich countries. That's where we have less resources and we must make a better use of them. So this is quite relevant in low-income countries. And it's relevant for whom? When I talk about the biases, one of the biases is that to a group of experts, a philosopher thinks this is important, therefore it's important. Here we think that what's important is because it's relevant for people. And the evidence I always ask the students is to discuss this with their grandmother. If their grandmother can talk about this for 2 hours. We are talking about someone who is directly related to people. If your grandmother doesn't understand because you are talking about language in terms of functionalities and capacities, this is not relevant to the experience of well-being of human beings. Human beings experience tiredness. Now I assume that you are experiencing this and you know it. You experience pain, suffering, you experience emotional processes, affection, sadness, achievements and failures. And when my grandmother was alive, I could talk with her about these sufferings, pain, failures, because this is something very close to people. And this is what we have lost in measuring and in the aspiration of progress. And we've lost that in many of the social programs. We kept an indicator because it's objective and a committee of experts defines so, but it's not close to what is relevant for people. So I'm going to go quickly over these slides. One of the central arguments is that this is relevant for politicians. Because politicians, if we are promoting a progress that doesn't reach people, this is progress in our indicators. If we have great measures of success in our social programs, but they do not reach people, this is seen in our indicators. But it's not relevant. That is how people live their everyday lives. The common indicators used are deficient, are insufficient. Here's an example already mentioned by Ed Diner in Costa Rica, Pablo González in Chile. Chile is one of the examples of the economic miracle. It's very bad in all the indicators. As Pablo was saying, people is not satisfied with the economic situation, they're not satisfied with the country. There's something there that says, well, a model based on economic growth seems to be insufficient to reach people. Growth can be important, but it depends on how we use it and how we reach it. There are different manners. Costa Rica is very well. I want to show you this one. These are the correlationships. The first one is in red. We talk about the Human Development Index, but when we analyze this in Latin America at the country level, its correlationship with the GDP, it's 0.91. So in the bottom, there's no great difference between the information given by the Human Development Index, to which we devote a lot of resources or allocate a lot of resources, and we promote it, and the per capita income. So this is in terms of information. The life satisfaction shows lower correlationships and the emotional states. Here we have more valuable information for the human beings. Someone could turn this argument around and say, if there's no correlation, there's something wrong with the information. So the question is, which one, the GDP or life satisfaction? But I don't know how much time I have left. Let me go to this part, social programs. These social programs developed in Mexico based on condition transference. Oportunidades is the most known one. Is inspired on the 70s, 60s with the theories of human capital. The human capital theories, you have to make the sacrifice of studying and then look for a job, and this is an evil because in economic theory, work is bad and recreation is good. And now with my income, I can buy whatever gives me well-being. This is the conception of the programs, and they are still based on this idea. We give scholarships to study, to start working, to have an income, and with that income, they get out of poverty. That's the inspiration. It's fascinating to see this Abbott manual, a mathematician from the 1800s, about the flatlanders. I say that the economists, we are kind of flatlanders. We all see everything in terms of income, of this horizontal line. And if you skip the line of poverty here, then you are out of poverty. So I took out the flowers. That's what we are saying. What can we found empirically? Skipping this line or jumping this line makes people satisfied with their lives, to have positive emotional states. Yes, there's a correlation, but the thing is not whether it influences or not. It is if it's enough to say I took out the flowers already, or should I be concerned about where I put them? Once we include this dimension, that is the green line, sometimes we use life satisfaction or emotional states. We start seeing that people is not poor anymore, but what's happening with their life satisfaction when they are not poor anymore? And here, what's important is not to forget that income is not an end, but an input for well-being. And as an input, we can measure its productivity, and even we can increase it. That is to improve the social programs. What's the risk? That we follow the red line and not the green line. The red line, it's many people who are not poor anymore, but they are still unsatisfied. Is this possible? Yes, it is. The empirical studies show it is. I'm going to explain you quickly why. What we want is to follow the green line. I take out the flowers, but I put them in a place where they can be enjoyed. Here, I take out the people. Well, people are not poor anymore, and I also put them in a satisfactory situation. So it is very important for the social programs. This is what I was saying. It's not only getting people out of poverty. They should be placed in a satisfactory life. With this, will improve performance indicators like a lower abandonment rate of social programs and more retention and productivity at work. And this is translated into income. There are several important matters, because education shouldn't be seen as a sacrifice. Education should be rewarding as well. If the boy is happy, satisfied, oftentimes because they tell him, if you continue studying, you will have a higher income, and also because he has her girlfriend there, and he's not going to leave school. Or maybe he has good friends that give him satisfaction, he's going to stay at school. And also with migration. Satisfactory work is not an evil, but a good by itself. And we should start thinking what kind of works we have. He has an income. So he should be removed from the statistics of poor people. Let me go further. And it was a discussion about whether poor people were happy or not. When we find a poor person who is happy, the first reaction as researchers is try to understand this phenomenon, not to disregard it. How can I explain this? What are the theories I propose and how can I corroborate them? One of the theories is that as human beings, and I go back that we are not classifying poor people but human beings, as human beings, we are much more than consumers. And in the textbooks, I've taught microeconomics for 3 years. I began when I was very young. 30 years teaching microeconomics. And in the textbooks, I always have consumers and no persons, no human beings. The literature of life domains helps me to understand that people obtain life satisfaction not only from income, but also from work. You can have a good income and be in a work you don't like, with colleagues who do not get along, an irrespectful boss, and that reduces the life satisfaction. People obtain life satisfaction just like you and me from couple relationships, with your relationship with children, but not when they are teenagers. But we can obtain a great part of our satisfaction from there. If we have defined people just to the extent of their income, well, they are happy because they have a good relationship with children, they have spare time to enjoy it, they have an environment of friends that is important. So that's the explanation. What have we done to design social programs with the inspiration of human capital to improve their education, their health, to enter the work market? And as Pablo was saying, even though we design them like this, these programs have an impact on everything. You cannot tell this person you are a consumer and the rest of your life leave it aside. No, you are a human being and you can have a work that took you out of poverty, but you don't see your wife anymore and you don't see your children anymore. There's no rest. So all of that has an effect. So when we measure subjective well-being in these programs, we see the costs and benefits that we didn't observe from all these programs. And that's when we have a more comprehensive vision to better design the programs, not only affecting the economic part, but shouldn't damage the other. And also the other should have a positive impact. We have to think on these comprehensive programs. And quickly, because I know that you're all tired, in order to encourage these programs, some of the recommendations are: we should not forget that as human beings, in poverty we also have human relationships, we have friends, and this has to be included in the design. You cannot destroy something as valuable as the relationship wealth just to obtain more income. We need to obtain more income both personally and economically without destroying, but rather fostering these human relationships. Spare time is something we do not include. They are not poor anymore. They have no free time to enjoy and mental health, and also to dedicate time to their friends, because human relationships need time. So work shouldn't be seen as a place where you sacrifice to be paid well and stop being poor, and start seeing social programs, whether the works are rewarding or not. And also education. Education shouldn't be 11 or 12 years of sacrifice and then you can have a good income. It should be a place for enjoyment for children. And besides, children do not abandon school, so this is a virtuous circle. We also talked about, well, all these topics allows us to formulate social programs that have an impact on people and are more efficient in terms that with the same expenditure we achieve more. So efficiency is very important. Basically, we have to include this, and sincerely, 30 years of teaching microeconomics, we need to stop talking about consumers and talk about persons, and to have this more comprehensive vision. Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. Thanks to the 5 panelists who have delivered excellent presentations. I'd like to know if there are any questions. No one was around with, collecting the questions. I would like to say that the last presentation by Mariano Rojas is a great question for the first presentation that was Edgar's. So maybe in 2 minutes you can make any comment about what Mariano presented. Well, I think that as we can see, there are more points of agreement than differences. I think that the debate, if we update the social programs, we can see that this welfare vision has been gradually eliminated, and we have programs. Apart from incorporating these measures, it's evident that there's a need to take into account the beneficiaries of social programs and know more directly their needs to encourage the impact of social programs, taking them into account. For instance, we have the program 70s and more that doesn't only include money given every 2 months, but also some workshops or training sessions for the elderly. So all these arguments or elements formulated by Dr. Rojas have been incorporated somehow. Unfortunately, what we have to recognize is that the resources are scarce always. So we are not saying that they shouldn't be included in a general manner, but luckily for everyone and for the tranquility of everyone, I think this dialogue between the public sector and the academy is always useful, and the public policies are always enriched with the participation of the academics. So, for instance, we have programs like daycare centers for children. We take into account the impact of the program on mothers, not only regarding work, but also satisfaction, and they reflect so in their survey because there's a person taking care of their children, and this is translated into a higher well-being. There's a concept or a criterion in the social programs, at least within CEDESOL's programs. We have more than 20 programs, social programs with operation rules. As you can see, they try to recognize the heterogeneity of the needs among several sectors of the population, and in this regard, also respond to specific needs, not only in terms of income, but also education. In the program opportunities, we have workshops that train the beneficiaries in many topics for family development. I have one question for each one of the remaining panelists. From left to right, could you tell us, Pablo? I have a question on how to measure the capacities from Flaxo. How to measure the capacities? Well, it was done through a survey that measured perceptions, individual perceptions on how much of these capacities they have. So the assessment of what they have, and also if they could have more of that capacity. There are several questions that are included. This is on the web. You can download it, and you have all the questions. It's around 50 questions or more that measure the capacities. Evidently, social cohesion is related. There are different ways to see this. For instance, we did a multi-level model with several countries on the World Survey on Values of 2011 that gives more than 400,000 observations, and we have several variables related to social condition, trust in institutions, etc., and that has an impact on subjective individual well-being. But we propose to measure explicitly subjective well-being in a society that eventually could think that questions related to social condition could feed that space of results as well, not only as a determining factor in individual happiness, but also subjective well-being as a society.
Go ahead. Okay. Very fast. At the moment, there is no direct link between the set of...
Can you read the question?
Sorry. The question is if in this moment the Italian government or other agents are using subjective well-being information for public policies. About this, I can say that at the moment there is not a direct link between the work was finished in the last months. On the other side, in this moment, there is no government in Italy, so it's very hard to use indicators. Anyway, there are very important input on this because in a general law of December 2012, there were included indicators on well-being, especially with reference to the so-called smart cities. And this law asked to National Institute of Statistics to produce a very complex dashboard of indicators in order to ensure monitoring of the development of these smart cities at the urban level. We are starting on this, and this law is very, very important. In addition, I can say that perhaps we have not to imagine a very direct link between well-being indicators and specific policy, because when we speak about specific policies, we need of other indicators, of other evaluation, assessment, ex ante, ex post models in order to measure and evaluate a single policy. But this is another and complex argument.
Thank you. Zachary?
I have a question from Gerardo Leva. The UK government has spent a great deal of money and political capital to generate subjective well-being statistics. What specific policies is the UK government undertaking based on this new information? Please give concrete examples. I feel like I'm taking an exam with that last admonition. Thank you, Professor. I didn't have a lot of time to talk about this because I had to truncate my presentation, but I did at least give an indication that there is a lot going on, but it's still early days. I'll give some specific examples, but I just want to say overall that it's a work in progress, but there's a great deal of dedication within the Cabinet Office with support from the Prime Minister to make sure that well-being is incorporated into the way in which the government does its job. And I should also say, I didn't mention, I had to race through, but in about 6 months' time to a year, the Cabinet Office is going to release a report on exactly what they're doing, the progress they've made, and various programs that they've undertaken. So keep an eye out for that. So, some of which that some of the things I'm privy to are restricted at this point, so I can't, sort of tell you everything because it's still a work in progress. But I can give you some indications of things that are sort of in process or that they're trying to do. Let's see. I already mentioned this idea of national service, the idea that to build social capital amongst the youth would also build an increasing level of life satisfaction. And there's a pilot program in 2011 that showed some success in doing that. I had a slide about that. In terms of determining alcohol strategy, there have been looks at how alcohol has impacted subjective well-being, and they've been actively considered in the government's policy on alcohol strategy, how to not only reduce consumption, but one of the interesting findings that well-being has shown is that moderate consumption most highly correlates to well-being, that people who abstain or people who drink to excess are actually less happy and have less lifetime satisfaction than those, and less subjective well-being than those who drink moderately. What else? Mental health, integrating well-being into new governance structures. I think probably the best example of that is the Public Health England, PHE, which has been established to protect and improve the nation's health and well-being and reduce health inequalities. It's going to work towards integrating work on well-being throughout its key functions and approaches to reduce inequality and to increase well-being. There's a whole list of programs here, but again, it's sort of an experimental process at this point, and I think the Cabinet Office and Legatum are looking forward to our report to try to give them some guidance on where they can best experiment and where they can best put their time to get a good, efficient use of resources on well-being.
Thank you.
Well, just a couple of questions. One asks, what recommendations would CESOL make for adequate use of information regarding subjective well-being? And well, I think the most punctual recommendation is that if you need to incorporate these surveys in social program evaluation, Coneval does this. Has to be an external organism. It can't be the institution because of transparency issues, but social program evaluation leads to height, weight, do they have a job, do they not have a job, but they don't ask how satisfied they are with their lives. So that's the first step before redesigning and reevaluating programs and finding ways to improve. And something that runs parallel to this, and which, well, they're going to have to start hiring new professionals who know about subjective well-being, and this brings the discussion to universities and formation of people who actually understand this. But these surveys should be part of program evaluations and be considered for redesign. The other is more general. How can we get rid Mexican social programs from paternalism? Well, I think this has a little to do with what Professor Diener about subjective well-being being democratic. It gives us information about those who have benefited from social programs, but haven't really made the best out of them, because it tells you how the program affects them subjectively. So subjective well-being, well, we ask people how satisfied they are with their lives, if they're happy, if they're sad, but we don't ask them what makes them happy, because we consider that these events have never taken place with them. Well, in Sussex, they're aware of the participatory ones, but many people don't know what it's like to live in a 200 square meter house. Would it make sense to ask them, would it make you happy to live in a society of this type? Well, they don't even know what a society like that looks like. So what we ask people is, okay, are you happy with your life? Are you not? Well, they know this because they've experimented this. The rest is hypothetical. But so we can ask it, but we need to see the bias. The issue of not asking is that there's paternalism and there's bias, because when there are experts saying it's you, you're right, you're wrong, there's everything from ethnocentrism to political economic biases. What's good for my institution or whatever. There's disciplinary biases. If we have economists, we focus on one thing. If we have political scientists, we focus on something else. So that's why it's good in order to avoid top-down paternalism. It's good to have this information that's coming from the people. Okay, thank you. I have some synthesis of the expositions, but I think I'm not going to read them. I'm just going to give you all your